the road. It's like it's propping up the horizon. So straight, so static, and there is no end to it. The desert landscape changes its colors and shapes, goes into the distance behind. But the road remains the same, only cracks in the ground dance under the boots, like a kaleidoscope, changing the pattern, and only rare grasses try in vain to grow here. The traveler walks all day, and the sun has already circled the firmament, frozen over this endless trail. Like a dot above the letter I, the last static detail heralding sunset. It is not time yet, but he is tired. He stopped and, wrinkling his slightly sweat-covered forehead, squinting his eyes at the bright afternoon light, looked around. At times the desert seemed so alive and varied, and sometimes he wanted to get off that dead road and walk to where the agaves and cacti grew. Cranrea and groundsel bloom in purple and yellow, as if they were competing to see who would paint the largest area of dryland. And between their rare but bright touches, every now and then the green color of yucca and low shrubbery. And the land itself does not lag behind in this festival of colors, and saturates the picture with pleasance and etones. This flat canvas on the horizon is covered by a clear blue sky. So deep and volumetric, it is mesmerizing in its purity. And if you look at it for a long time, it seems it could hypnotize you, if it were not for the bright red mountains that periodically interrupt this canvas. How they are distinguished against the chaotic forms of plants, such smooth gigantic pillars. These stone boulders look more like the work of human hands than nature, just like this exact road. The wanderer scrolled his associations in his head as he pulled the flask from his backpack. The cork popped out with a typical squelch with his thumb and hung on the rope. In 5 days of travel, that sound had become special. For a man in the desert, there is nothing more pleasant than fresh, cool water. He enjoys every sip, feeling the sweet, clean taste. Life has never been more beautiful than it is today. The next couple of hours passed quickly. It was easier to walk in anticipation of rest. And now the sun touches the horizon, where you can barely see the distance of the road. And like a bursting ball of paint on the tip of a needle, it loses its rounded shape, spilling scarlet colors and tints everywhere, painting the clouds, the sky, and even the earth. It is a time of halt. Moving on, gradually slowing down, the traveler looks around in search of a convenient place. Here the colors begin to slowly fade, and only the sun would still stand out for its brightness if not for the warm light of the fire, visible from a small ravine below the farthest hill. By the time he reached it, the sun was already hidden, and his eyes had time to get used to the darkness, so the fire seemed so intense. The dancing light of the flames reflected off the rocks and exuded much heat. It was as if someone had carefully placed these stone walls in a semicircle, covering the fire from the dusty wind. And out of the mountain a shrubbery protruded almost horizontally, forming a cover. It was no way that this natural shelter would protect you from the rain, but it was really cozy here. Besides, it hadn't rained in these areas for a long time. The sense of comfort was completed by the delicious aroma of roast meat. The brief reflection was stopped by a gesture of a man sitting by the bonfire. It was an old Cheyenne with a wistful face. He had laid his poncho on the ground and was comfortably seated in front of the pyre, neatly stacking a spare pile of firewood beside him. This man blended harmoniously into the local atmosphere, as if he were an essential element, as if the place would be empty without him. His grey but thick hair was braided into 2 large braids with beads at the bottom, and his clothing was simple but pretty, rich with the same hues as the local landscape. Multicolored, elaborate embroidery and fine fabrics have always been the hallmark of the prairie nations. He held a smoking pipe in his hand, which he waved, inviting the stranger to the fire. The wanderer followed his example, laid his poncho on the ground, and sat down beside him, and the elder greeted him with a nod.
You must be tired. Where you are traveling?
I'm going to Baja.
The wanderer answered shortly, and for a few seconds he wondered if he should trust the stranger in the desert.
Well, it's not far at all. You'll be there tomorrow evening. Now let me treat you to dinner.
I'll be glad. Thanks.
The mistrust slowly faded away by the stranger's incredible friendliness, the campfire's warmth, and the symphony of scents. The smell of smoke mixed with the fragrance of flowers and a roasted hare completed this composition. Of course, fatigue and hunger played a major part, since only water and a couple of gallets were left from reserves. The elder laid his pipe aside on his poncho, took his meal off the fire, and with a quiet tinkling he drew a sharp knife with a cane-carved handle, on top of which was a coyote's head. Then he easily cut the hare into fairly equal pieces, and leisurely handed one of them to his guest. They ate in silence, staring at the fire, listening to the flame crackle, the nocturnal sounds of insects, birds, and wild animals. Even at night there was life all around, but now it was not in color and heat, but in sounds and smells. The clear sky was studded with bright stars, like an endless flock of glowing fishes in a dark ocean. All the dust had settled, and the air was so clear that one could see the craters on the full moon. The moon itself emitted a cold light, filling the entire valley with a monochromatic but bright color. The wanderer felt peace, and for a moment he wanted to stay here forever.
The meat is delicious. It seems to be a young hare, but there's something else here.
It's a prickly pear. I soaked the meat in juice before cooking it. As it happens, it wasn't really the hare. It was the pear that was to be my dinner tonight.
The wanderer leaned over a bit and turned to the old man with interest.
And why is that?
With a slight shake of his head, without taking his eyes off the fire, the elder answered,
Well, I'll tell you the story.
After a short pause, he picked up his smoking pipe, took a lightly burning stick from the campfire, lighted the pipe, and began his story.
Hares have long lived in these canyons, for there is a stream nearby, so puntia also grows here richly. In the evening I went to harvest it for jam.
He was silent for a moment, took a couple of whiffs of tobacco smoke, and looked at his guest.
Please continue.
The Cheyenne stared into the fire again, and exhaling the smoke, continued.
Anyway, while I was hunting the prickly pear, someone was hunting here too. It was an old coyote. My eyes met his, and we stared into each other for a while. He had just caught a young hare and was holding it in his jaws, breathing heavily after an exhausting chase, sniffing his nose. When he saw me with the knife, he froze in place and couldn't decide what to do, and neither could I. Eventually he decided to run away, but he was very tired and dropped his prey under the nearest cactus. Could an old hungry coyote expect a successful hunt to turn into a loss and a danger? And could a young hare expect his life to be ended on this beautiful evening right by his favorite creek, among his congeners, where it is always breezy and safe, where there is plenty of greenery, where there is shade at noon and shelter from the wind at night? And could I expect him to be my prey today, instead of a prickly pear? I decided not to leave it there, and took it with me, along with a small bunch of Apuntia fruits.
Then the storyteller fell silent, turned to the wayfarer, and passed him the pipe.
I don't know what tomorrow holds for me either.
The wanderer said, turning and nodding appreciatively. Putting away the rest of his dinner, he took the pipe, took a couple of whiffs of the spicy smoke, looked at the burning fire, and continued.
My uncle has left this world, leaving a legacy in Baja. And I, as his only heir, must close his business, distribute his real estate and other property. It was my duty to my uncle that brought me here, for I had last been here a long time ago, when I was a child. But having come here, I was charmed by this land, and now I don't know if I should go back north at all.
The traveller's face became as wistful as that of his new acquaintance. He thought about the days he had spent on the road. Such a straight way, and it seemed to have only two directions. Behind was his home and his routine life, and ahead was a long-forgotten land and uncertainty. and one might as well turn off the road entirely.
The old man said in a reassuring tone, turning to his guest again and pausing his reflections.
You still have time.
Then he took a bundle of firewood and, bending over quietly, tossed it into the fire. The pyre crackled as if it were accepting a treat, and sparks flew into the air. The new acquaintances gazed upward at these flying flames, and when they lowered their eyes, they saw a small figure and glittering embers in the darkness. After a few moments, a muzzle emerged from the shadows, and then the whole beast, though it remained at a safe distance. It was an old coyote, skinny and slightly shabby. The humans looked at it, and it looked at them. The coyote wanted to turn back, but his hunger and the smell of the hair had almost entirely taken away his doubts and fears. However, he still did not dare to come closer. Then the traveler took the rest of his meal that lay nearby, mostly bones, but with small pieces of meat. He slowly rose, leaned slightly, and walked around the fire. The coyote and the Cheyenne watched his movements intently. Then, after taking only a few short steps, the man threw the food so that it fell not far from the coyote. The beast looked at the food, then at the wanderer, then at the elder, and without hesitation, snatched up the rest of the hair. With another glance at the humans, it quickly turned around, ducked into the shadows, and disappeared without a trace behind the ravine.